Most of the time when you're doing redstone, you're thinking about how to do the thing you want to do. Move blocks in a certain way, figure out some sort of logic, whatever. What you don't usually think about are the wires that move a signal from one place to another. In general, to make something that just kinda works, you just need to put down a line of dust and repeaters. This works perfectly fine, but it's not the best you can do. Plus, there are a bunch of fairly common situations where this basic wire doesn't work very well. Because of these facts, I figured it could be a good idea to make a video about some things you can do to improve your redstone wiring. First thing to talk about are the different kinds of wires you can have. Since wires are just things that carry data, and there are multiple ways to represent data in Minecraft, there are multiple types of wire. The main type of wire is the one you're probably thinking of, the kind of wire where you're just paying attention to whether the redstone is on or off. I like to refer to these kinds of wires as binary wires, since binary can basically just mean two states, and these wires have two states, being on and off. The second kind of wire is a wire that holds a signal strength. I don't really have a name for these, despite how often I use them, so I'll just call them strength wires for this video. If you wanted to match the naming scheme for binary wires, you could call these hexadecimal wires because of their 16 states. But I don't feel like saying hexadecimal more than I have to, so I'll stick with strength wires. The third kind of wire that I know of would be a wire that only sends a pulse instead of a constant signal. I would call these pulse wires, but I won't be talking about these in this video. There's just a lot I would want to cover with those, which would make this video even longer than it already is. So I might make a video about those in the future, just in case you're interested. As for the actual tips I've got, I'm going to start simple. Making a wire go up or down can be a pain sometimes. Spiral staircases with dust on them work, but they can be pretty bulky and they don't feel very cool. A pretty well-known way to go up with a binary wire is a torch tower, where you make a tower of redstone torches and blocks. Each torch powers the block above it, flipping the state of the torch on top of that. This signal keeps going upwards to the top of the tower. This is generally a pretty good way to go about things, since it's compact and works for pretty much any height that you need, but it does add a sizable delay for large heights, so it can help to have some other designs in your bag of tricks. For example, you're able to make a dust staircase that just goes back and forth using transparent blocks. Using this, you can power the wire at the bottom to power stuff at the top. This doesn't work going downwards though, because transparent blocks are kind of funky like that. I'll talk more about them later. If you do this, you take up an extra block going sideways, and you'll have to be more careful to make sure you don't accidentally power the line along the way, but it'll work with less delay than a standard torch tower. To go down with a binary wire, you can actually still make use of redstone torches with this system that I don't have a catchy name for. Each torch powers a redstone dust below it, which then flips the torch attached to the next block down. It works similarly to a torch tower, just with a little extra redstone dust to make it work going downwards. Unfortunately, these systems don't work with strength wires because they rely on redstone torches. Also unfortunately, I don't know of a better way to go upwards with a strength wire than just making a spiral staircase. Going down though, you're able to make use of this lattice thing instead. For each of these little sections, a comparator takes an input from the block behind it, copying the signal strength and strongly powering the block in front of it with that signal strength. Because the block is being strongly powered, the dust below it is powered to the same signal strength. That dust then weakly powers the block below it with that signal strength, which is read by the next comparator down, continuing the chain. This system is a bit faster and takes up less space than a downward spiral, and in my opinion, it's just kind of cooler, so it's a good one to remember. That's up and down covered, so how about some tips for going sideways? Generally, this is the easy direction, since repeaters and comparators both take input through their back, push an output through their front. As such, I only have a couple of notes here. For one, instead of feeding redstone dust straight into a repeater or comparator, you can point that dust at a block that then powers the repeater or comparator. That way you can get an extra block out of each section of your wire. You can get another extra block out of each section by having your repeater or comparator power a block next to the rest of your wire instead of powering the wire directly. These minor optimizations don't make much of a difference with binary wires, but is really helpful with strength wires because of how they can only have, at most, one piece of dust in a row without messing with the strength being transmitted. There's not a lot else to say about individual wires going sideways, but I can mention putting multiple wires next to each other. With the standard binary wire design, you need to space them apart at least one block, otherwise the dust from the two wires will connect, meaning the outputs of both wires will be linked. There are a few ways to get around this though. For example, you can bump one of these wires up a block and cut off all of the connections between the wires using opaque blocks. This is a pretty simple way to put two binary wires next to each other, although it does require an extra block going upwards. Luckily, using some cleverness, you can get rid of this extra space requirement. One such way to do this is to make sure each dust section is 15 blocks long exactly. With this setup, the dust all the way at the end will only be at strength 1 when it's powered, which means it won't be able to power the dust next to it, so the power going through the wire will stay in the wire that you powered directly. Alternatively, for shorter stretches, you can use a similar setup to the one that I recommended for strength wires earlier. If you use this setup for both wires, with one starting with dust and the other starting with repeater, because repeaters aren't affected by redstone dust through their sides, the wires will be completely independent of each other. You could achieve a similar result by making wires entirely out of repeaters, but that would kind of be expensive for survival mode, and it would make each wire have a lot of delay, so this system is a bit better in those regards. As a final note about having multiple wires, sometimes you have to make your wires cross over each other. An easy way to do this is to just make your wires go up and down stairs, but this takes up a fair amount of space vertically, and I just don't really like how it looks all that much. Instead of this, you can make use of more repeaters and block powering shenanigans. At the point where the two wires cross, you can make one wire go through a repeater. On the other wire, one block before the crossing, you can dip the wire down a block and make use of another repeater to strongly power the block that the repeater from the first wire is sitting on top of. On the other side of that block, you can put a piece of redstone dust next to the block being powered and step the wire back up to the same height as before. You can use the same ideas by stepping one wire up instead of down, and you can also use these systems with strength wires if you're careful about your dust usage. Now, what's the deal with transparent blocks? There's actually a lot going on with them. Before I get into that though, it's technically more accurate to call them non-conductive blocks, seeing as how the block looks generally has nothing to do with its conductivity, but I've heard them referred to as transparent blocks often enough for the term to have stuck with me, so I tend to swap back and forth between the two terms. Just know that whenever I call a block transparent or non-conductive, I mean the same thing. The same goes for the terms opaque and conductive, although I'm not as attached to the term opaque. I usually just use it when I'm using transparent for the consistency. For some actual information, I should start with how these two varieties of blocks actually differ from each other. One of the most obvious differences is that conductive blocks can be powered, both strongly where it'll power any dust adjacent, and weakly where it won't. Non-conductive blocks, on the other hand, can't be powered at all. This can be really helpful for controlling what each wire is doing in fairly compact redstone machines, where wires are running near other things. Another difference is that opaque blocks will cut off any redstone lines that go up a block if placed above the lower piece of redstone. Transparent blocks just don't do this, meaning you're able to do the staircase thing I mentioned earlier. Because the dust lines aren't cut off, they can just keep running upwards along the stairs all the way up to the top. Thirdly, transparent blocks don't let redstone signals go down their sides. This is why when I first brought up the funky transparent stairs thing, I said it only worked going upwards. This can be helpful in some cases to make one-way redstone without delays, but in most situations you can just use a repeater to make a redstone signal only go one way. Still helpful to know about just in case you break something by using transparent blocks where you shouldn't. And a last thing I want to talk about, color coding. It can be helpful for keeping track of what different wires mean when you have multiple of them close together. As for what blocks to use, it doesn't matter a whole lot as long as you remember what each block means. To help with that, it can be a good idea to just label each line at some point with a sign. You don't even have to label the lines directly. You could put a key nearby that consists of a bunch of blocks with signs on them. I do recommend using the dyeable colored blocks like wool, though, since you can easily keep your color coding going when swapping to transparent blocks by using stained glass. You can also swap to glazed terracotta on the off chance you need to put a wire next to some slime blocks that are being moved by pistons. Not a common scenario, but it'll happen occasionally, so it's good to keep in mind. That should be just about all I want to say about binary wires and strength wires. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you liked the video. I don't have anything else to mention here, so I won't draw it out. Have a good day, organize your spaghetti, and have fun doing some redstone.